Now more of the Midcoast Morning Buzz with Richard and Jim. Radio 9, WCME.
Could the development at Brunswick Landing be adversely affecting the wildlife there? And to speak to that issue is Jackie Sartoris. Now, before I introduce Jackie, I want to read her bio. This proves that this woman is the smartest person in the room, which doesn't take much here. Jackie is an attorney in Brunswick, specializing in elder law, mediation, and negotiation. She's perhaps better known as a former Brunswick town councilor who represented the District 2 from 2007, during which time she served on the town's Comprehensive Plan Committee, the board that established the Teen Center at People Plus, and the Muir Point Boat Launch Citizens Advisory Committee, among other boards and committees. She's the former senior planner of the Maine State Planning Office. She won national awards for her work balancing development and conservation concerns, resulting in a complete overhaul of Maine's wetland laws. She worked with many municipalities to assist their ordinances and planning efforts. And most recently, as if she hasn't been busy enough, she's been outspoken in criticizing the Midcoast Regional Redevelopment Authority's proposal for subdividing the acreage on the former Naval Air Station.
I would sum it up just by very quickly noting that it would appear that there is very little standing between Jackie Sartoris and world domination at the moment.
Jackie, thank you so much for coming in and braving what's left of this storm.
We need to make one slight correction. I think we have been, in all good faith, identifying Jackie this morning as an environmental lawyer, and you tell me you were certainly trained and backgrounded in that area, but you are not practicing environmental law.
That's correct. That's right. Thank you for correcting that. Although I have done environmental law in the past, actually, before getting my law degree, I worked as a private consultant for a while doing environmental impact statements and other work. And obviously, I have a land use planning background. Nevertheless, I am pursuing elder law mediation and negotiation.
Elder law, which is, as I understand it, and I have a very good friend who's involved in elder law, and this may be the fastest growing area of the practice of law.
Well, of course, it's the fastest growing demographic.
Yes.
So that's definitely one of the reasons that there's such a need. But it was something that I did a little bit of work on actually before law school, and then I interned for a little while with Legal Services for the Elderly, which is a wonderful organization. I'd love to come back and talk to you about that at some point.
We'll have you back.
I know you've got limited time, though, so I'm happy to fill you in on any questions you have about the work I've been doing with the Mira redevelopment plan.
This morning we're going to focus on Brunswick Landing, the former Naval Air Station, and Richard.
Jackie, tell me, how are the current wildlife conditions down there at Brunswick Landing different from the past when it was a functioning Naval Air Station?
Actually, that's a great question. I think a lot of folks think that since the Naval Air Station has left, the wildlife issues must be much better somehow. So first, I just want to talk about the fact that my concern is really very specific to the most significant natural community type on the base. And that's about 100 plus acres that encompasses the northern extent of the runways of the base and then some of the developable land a little bit to the east. So it's actually, there's a lot of conservation land on the base that's been set aside. I know there's a whole trail system. I've been out there cross-country skiing. It's a really magnificent part of the former base close to the coast, which is in protection and will be conserved for public use. But the most significant natural community type with endangered and threatened species on the base is sort of unfortunately right at the northern extent of the base, where it really conflicts to some degree with some of the potential reuse. Back when that was in the Navy's hands, actually the Navy had a natural resources planner who knew of the high significance of the biological community there, and they did a superb job of managing for the species, and at the same time, obviously it was very consistent with running an airport. So there was no risk to the planes by having this natural community there. They did periodic burning, which is exactly what this natural community type requires. Now I think there's a little bit more of a question about how to manage that portion of the base, and of course I think folks are very eager to work with Mira. I certainly, as a town councilor, remember hearing from the state wildlife agencies as well as some of the local conservation, state-level conservation organizations, that they were very eager to work with the redevelopment authority to make sure that management continued to be as good as it was under the Navy.
Just want to check something here. Sounds like you would be inclined to agree with the statement made by Ed Benedict, who, at least I don't know if he still is, but in 2011 was the president of the Brunswick Area Citizens for a Safe Environment, who said that in the past the Navy had institutional controls to limit exposure to polluted sites, like restricting access to the base to military personnel and guests. With those controls gone, Benedict says it's important for people to know what's there.
Well, I think that those of us who enjoyed the Naval Air Station in a very limited way were really eager in some ways to see the station open to the public as it was after the base was removed from active military status. I think the downside of having that terrific access, first of all, obviously the huge loss of jobs and the economic potential on the base, which is now just potential more than anything else. And that was certainly my primary concern as a town councilor, was the economic impact to Brunswick. The second issue, though, and I think that Mr. Benedict really hit upon it, is that there was one overarching manager for the base, and regrettably the base does have apparently some very significant groundwater contamination and other toxics. I really focused primarily on the natural community and the natural resources on the base, in part because those were issues that I understood very well when I was a counselor. They had been very clearly identified, and to be honest, I barely start to understand the toxics issues on the base, which is one of the reasons why I'm actually very concerned that that needs some additional attention. And I want to be clear here. I think Mira's intentions are very good when it comes to managing toxics on the base, and I think to some degree managing the natural resources on the base. They have a charter from the state that says their primary objective is development. So I think that when it comes to getting development on the base, they are kind of doing the job they've been handed. Zoning, however, is clearly given to the town of Brunswick, and that's where I think we need to have a very high level of concern about what happens on the base and making sure that we've done our due diligence as a community. I'm not sure that we've really hit that mark, in part because we're all so concerned about economic development. So I would strongly urge you to have someone from the Brunswick Area Citizens Group come and speak with you about the toxics issues.
Well, I recall I was at the planning board meeting where approval was eventually given to this commercial and industrial subdivision that's going in out there, and there were some. You're indicating some concern about the groundwater contamination possibility and potential out there, but I remember Suzanne Johnson, who I believe was involved in overseeing the Superfund activity out
That's
there.
right. She's with the Brunswick Area Citizens.
She made some remarks at that meeting that sounded rather funereal, for maybe lack of a better term. She sounded quite concerned.
Well, and again, these are not issues that, Superfund is not an area that I've really worked with. I can just tell you, though, that the concerns that I heard really since January, I continue to have concerns. I feel that the town needs to make sure when we give the subdivision approval for undeveloped property in particular, where potentially new buildings and new exposure can occur, that we really know absolutely that the protections are in place that will make sure that as the institutional memory fades and there are simply individual property owners that remain, that we haven't created a situation of risk. I think that I'm going to segue then into the issues that I see with the undeveloped acreage to the northern extent of the base, in part because those are the issues I understand best. But I think they are also to some degree related. So when there was one managing body, the Navy really oversaw, clearly understood the high natural resources value associated with that acreage and managed the acreage accordingly. So bizarrely enough, that means periodic burns of that acreage. These are species that are fire dependent. They've evolved to be fire dependent. There are some endangered, certainly state endangered species there, an endangered butterfly as well as endangered plants and birds, state threatened birds, and there are also some species that are currently awaiting endangered status. So this is what's called a significant natural community. It's an S1 community, which makes it the most endangered kind of natural community in the state. A natural community is basically a neighborhood of plants, soils, and animals that coexist. Sandplain grasslands used to be fairly common in Maine. Now there are only 2 really large occurrences of sandplain grasslands left, one in Kennebunk and the one here at the Brunswick Naval Air Station, the former Naval Air Station. So the significance of that acreage really can't be overstated. I've been actually very encouraged by some of the statements that Mira has made recently. For example, the 22 acres which were available for development on their original master plan, they have now removed from the subdivision proposal after, I think, hearing a lot of public criticism about including that acreage. So now the next step to me is ensuring that the entire assemblage of acreage, the 100+ acres, are managed for those species so that they can persist, but also to make sure that that 22 acres no longer remains in the development queue, because right now it is still zoned for development. So I've heard some really encouraging things from Mira, but the history there has been, the town has called out that acreage as highly significant acreage and very important to us locally, dating back most recently, starting with the open space plan in 2000-2001, moving into the early conveyance requests that the town made once we knew the base was closing. This was our top identified significant area for habitat in Brunswick, clearly identified in a public process adopted while I was on the council. Very public process shared with what became Mira, so they were very aware of the acreage at that time. And then our comprehensive plan also calls out significant habitat on the base for protection. So this isn't an unknown quantity. I think the real question has been how to make that development perspective from Mira sort of jive better with the clear natural resources concerns the town has.
Just a couple more questions here. You, in your remarks, you're a former member of the town council. You were certainly concerned about the state of the local economy, economic development. You've mentioned in your remarks the importance of jobs. You had mentioned that MIRA, the Midcoast Regional Redevelopment Authority, that its primary mandate is economic development. Nonetheless, and I'm sure you've heard this, if you haven't heard it directly, you've overheard people saying it about you and some of your allies and some of your friends. People say, hey, we've been through a near national financial meltdown in 2008. That's been compounded here in the local area by the closing of the base and the loss of all those jobs. And Jackie, you and some of your friends and your allies have just got to understand that the priority is jobs, 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 and we really can't worry too much maybe at the present moment about wildlife habitats. What do you say to that? Because it does get said.
Well, of course it does. And I think that that's certainly an understandable perspective. What I would say is that we don't give up all of our values when our economic development values are really heightened, as I think they should be at this time. There are many hundreds of acres on the base. This first subdivision proposal was for 400 acres. So in terms of the wildlife habitat issue, we're really talking kind of out of the box about those 22 acres. There is, I think, ample room in Brunswick's value system for high regard for natural resources at the same time as a high value for economic development. That was clearly expressed in our comprehensive plan, and I think if you look at the voting record of the citizens of Brunswick, the conservation ethic in this community is very clear. I don't think that that challenges how important economic development is. But if we say that economic development must trump all of our other values, then I think what we're saying is that in the long term, there should not be left for the next generation the same sorts of natural resources, experiences, and values, and frankly, ecological benefits that we don't even understand. That, I think, goes too far. I think we do owe something to the next generation, and that includes both a healthy economy, but also making sure that things that are truly irreplaceable are protected by the folks now who make decisions.
The final question, as they used to say years ago at Richard Nixon's news conferences, you've indicated that you're pleased by some of the recent statements by MIRA, the Redevelopment Authority, but you've also confirmed and noted that MIRA's first priority is economic development, jobs. So how confident are you long term?
Well, what I'm confident about is that people need to pay attention. And I think that that's true in basically any representative democracy. What matters is that citizens remain engaged. I think the economic development interests are always at the table. They have economic interests. It's their job to be at the table. Those of us who show up as citizens, we're doing this on our own time. And I'm not going to say that I think that that's an easy job to do. I've refrained from being engaged with town council issues since I got off the council until January. So I would just encourage people to remain engaged. It is essential for there to be public oversight and dialogue, because frankly, environmental and conservation issues, although they're clear in our ordinance, I think they're fairly clear in the standards that should have been applied here. They need a voice, and I would encourage people who are interested or concerned, please contact me. Please go to the Brunswick Citizens for Responsible Development Facebook page. This is not an issue that's going to go away tomorrow, and I think that I hear some very encouraging things from Mira, but they need the partnership of engaged citizens.
I would say again, you maybe acknowledge, you've been quite engaged since January. We've heard a great deal from you. You were like the 10th member of the council, and that's okay. We need some of that. Now she's turning up her nose at that, but that's okay.
I hesitate to commit to attending more council meetings. I mean, they've been very kind to me. I really enjoy seeing those folks, and I really do understand, no matter where they vote, the work they do is hard, and they deserve our thanks. But I really am kind of hoping to step back a little bit from this sort of citizen activism. But thank you for the time today.
I would say there is no question, agree or disagree with some of your fine points. I mean, you come before the council, you speak intelligently, you speak with knowledge and substance, and not everybody does that.
Our guest this morning has been Jackie Sartoris. She's a former Brunswick town councilor and a current attorney here in Brunswick, and she's been expressing her concerns about how the development at Brunswick Landing is adversely affecting the wildlife there. Jackie, thank you so much for coming in, and we will certainly follow up on this at Radio 9 WCME.